start recording it. All right, everybody. Thank you for being here. My hope is that at the end of today, you are all going to be feeling very confident that you can do this. We're going to talk about a few different things today, but the goal is going to be that you know exactly what you're doing and how you're going to do it, and you can jump into it, right? So after this, you really don't need to be talking, you just need to be doing. So today is the action day. Let me just quickly point out a few things to you before we jump into the core of what we're going to do today. So I'm going to share my screen with you again. Like I mentioned, put your name in the chat box if you still haven't got access to the Canvas site for whatever reason, and I'll make sure that you get it. Here's our Canvas site again. I'm going to just show you that right in the very first module, I've added here where it says all Zio project recorded sessions. So I've added a link here where you'll be able to see all the past recordings of all these sessions that we've had over Zoom. So if you missed any one of them, you want to get a sense of what it is, feel free to always kind of go there and take a look at it. I also want to talk a little bit about these questions because we talked about this last time. You all came up with several questions, and then after that, several of you kind of added things to it as well, which was great. And so this week, I finally took everything that we've been talking about, everything that you all have been talking about, and then put it together in this big, giant list of possible questions, right, that you could be asking when you start conducting that oral interview of yours. This is by no means, a complete list, because each individual person who you are going to be interviewing is going to be unique, and their story is going to be unique. And so you hopefully, because you've done the pre-interview with them, or you've had a pre-conversation with them about this process, about this project, hopefully you kind of know certain things about them that you definitely want to tease out in the interview. So please feel free to add your own questions. And remember that you don't have to ask all of these questions. I've just put every possible question that I could think of and that you all came up with in this list, right? So if you want, you can just use these questions, and these are phrased in a way that they will be very helpful to you. So you can just go, these are the questions I want to focus on. You can pick and choose questions from here. You can add your own questions to it, but this is a good anchor for you to start with, so that you don't feel like, I don't even know what to ask. Am I asking the right questions? Am I missing out on something? Right? So here's something that you could definitely be doing. I will remind you of one thing though. When you decide on, okay, here are the questions that we're going to be using, make sure that you're asking at least a few questions from each of these groups, okay? So for example, like we talked about last week, here are some questions you could be asking about their early life, right? Their life back in their country of origin. What was it like? So you could pick some questions from here. Make sure you pick at least a few from here. If you are going to ask them to show you some pictures or some certificates or any documents, things like that, go ahead and you can use some questions from here. If you're not a problem at all. You definitely want to ask them some questions about their journey, right? What was that like? What was the social political condition like in which they were making that journey? What were the factors that helped them in that journey? And so you definitely want to find at least a few questions from this group and ask that. In cultural integration, we talked about that as well last week. You definitely want to ask a few questions about, so once they came to the US, what was it like, right? How did they adjust? How did they integrate? How did they, stay connected to their roots, but at the same time adjust to a new culture? All those kinds of questions become important. What were the challenges? What were the happy memories? All of that, right? And then the Zoroastrian, their own culture and identity, right? So the idea of how have they sort of maintained that connection with their own identity. So a few questions here are really important. And then some general questions at the end. So like I said, you don't have to ask all of these questions, but you may want to. Or you may want to also think about which ones are important to you and then use those. And of course, make sure you have questions that are related to your participant, because that's what's really important, right? You know their histories, you know their stories. So make sure that your interview is bringing those stories out. Do you have any questions about these questions before we move on? Does this make sense? Right? Good. And then some of you might decide, you know, I'm going to focus on a very specific thing. I'm going to focus only on this particular aspect of my interviewee's journey. That's fine too, right? Remember, like I keep telling you all, this is your interview, right? So you can be creative with it. You can focus on what you want to focus on. But here's a great map for you to think about. And if you can, many of you had these questions when you finished the assignment in Canvas. Many of you asked, so how long should the interview be? Because like I've given you the examples of those oral interviews from the Rice University, which were like an hour long, right? Again, the length really depends on you. I would say anything less than 15 minutes can maybe become too short. It'll just be a snapshot at that point. But anything between, I would say, 15 to like minutes to about 60 minutes, sometimes even 90 minutes is okay. But you don't have to go that far. Anything in between that range is perfectly fine. You do what you're comfortable doing, and you do what you think is going to be important and interesting to bring out. Okay, so, and if you're having any doubts about, hey, this is my interview, do you think, if you want suggestions from me, if you want me to look at those questions, anything like that, please feel free to share them with me, and I'm happy to give you feedback as well. If you feel confident, go ahead and do it, right? So you already have this anchor over here. So with that, today, I want to talk about something that several of you raised with me since we had our first training session. Some of you emailed me, some of you through your assignments. And many of you talked about, having certain concerns about like the challenges that can happen, the obstacles you might have to overcome when you're doing a project like this, right? And some of the biggest challenges is that how much can you rely on your participants' memories, right? So I'm going to take a little bit of time today, okay, and we're going to do a little bit of a neuroscience, a few neuroscience activities and experiments, because I want you to see that this process that you all are a part of is really a very scientific process, right? And if you really want good information, so doing certain things can be very helpful. So, if you've already done, I know we have a couple of people who've already done the interview, and they're brilliant, they're beautiful. If we have time, I want to show them to you today. But as you're thinking about doing this, I want you to think about these aspects of the brain and of memory that are very, very integral to a project like this. All right. So this is where you start doing some hands-on things with me. This is where you're going to need a piece of paper and pencil, just to play some games with me and things like that. Just so you know that we are not just doing this because this is a fun thing to do. We're actually doing this because this is a scientific process. So let's start. Right? Let's talk a little about memory and why it can be your best friend and your worst enemy when it comes to doing an oral history project. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to show you two pictures. Yeah. The picture on the left is it's a drawing. It's an art piece that's done on a canvas of a small Italian town, a small Italian village on, one of the mountains in Italy. It's done by an artist who lives in San Francisco. I forget his name right now. And you can see the same village in the picture on the right. And this picture is an actual photograph of that village, right? So compare the two pictures. This is a drawing, and this is the actual picture. What do you notice when you compare these two pictures? What jumps out at you all? You're going to have to kind of jump in with me today. What are you thinking? Are they similar? Do you see dissimilarities, distortions? What's going on?
They're pretty similar. Like there's houses and trees, and they're all kind of in the same spot.
Pretty similar, right? Yeah, and I see Zara shaking her head and things like that. What if I told you this? What if I told you that this artist, right? This is his hometown, this is his home village. He just sketched out this image. He had come to the US before the age of 5, right? He'd never gone back to Italy again. And he sketched this out when he was in his 30s, right? This picture was taken after he had made this sketch. So he had no pictures of his village. He was simply using and falling back on his memory to sketch out this image. Now, when you compare the two, wouldn't you say the similarities are even more striking? Somebody who the last time they saw this picture was when they were 5, and then they're creating this 20 years later just from memory. Seems pretty remarkable, right? Seems like a remarkable similarity there. Same artist this time. Again, on the left is his drawing, and on the right are the pictures taken of the little alleyway behind his house, right? Now you kind of look at these and you begin seeing they're pretty similar still. Again, remember, it's all done from memory. So they're still pretty similar. But you kind of see that they are, the drawing seems to be a little bit more, elongated, right? It's a little taller. The alleyway seems to be a little taller, a little bit bigger. Why do you think that might be happening? Why do you think that there might be a little bit more difference between his memory now and what it actually was like?
Maybe because he remembers it as a child, so everything looked bigger to him.
Exactly.
And that's why.
Absolutely right. Absolutely correct, right? And so your perception when you're younger of things is different from when you're older, right? And in this case, when you are a little kid looking up, everything looks bigger to you, right? And so you can see that distortion coming in. It's still not a lot, a little, but you can see that. And then finally, same artist, this is his actual house, his actual home. And you can see, again, painting on the left and the actual picture on the right. But this time you see a lot more distortions in there. Right? I mean, the painting on the left really doesn't do a very good job of representing the actual picture on the right. Any guesses why that might be happening?
He might have seen things like a little more colorful as a child.
Yeah, according to him, it's because his childhood wasn't the most pleasant, right? He had kind of lost his mother was going through a prolonged illness, and there were a lot of negative emotions sort of attached to that memory, and which interfered with his memory of that place. And so while the village itself and those alleyways were kind of connected with happy memories, because that's where he played with his friends and that's where he had fun, this was a place that was not really particularly connected with very happy memories. And so there were a lot more distortions in his memories of this place, right? This is why I'm bringing this up, because you all are doing an oral history project. And an oral history project literally depends on people's memories of events that have happened to them since a very long time, right? And so if you don't give them enough time to think about those events, to prepare about what to talk about, what they'd like to share, we can fall into certain rabbit holes, because we can't always just blindly rely on our memories. Memories are fickle, right? I want to show you a couple of other things so that you understand why this oral history project is so important and why this idea of memory is so important. And some of you may have already done this in biology and things like that, but it's connected to what you're doing. Because when we think about memory, our memory has 3 systems that we're always trying to work with, right? Your sensory memory is what is taking in information. This is important because that's going to help you understand what are the aspects of your interviewee's history that they actually remember well enough to be able to talk to you about, right? Working memory is the part of the memory that's doing the thinking in the moment, right? It's doing the work in the moment. This is important because it's going to help you understand what are they thinking about as they are doing the interview with you. So are you giving them enough time? Are you giving them enough, opportunity to think and to talk and to, take you down that journey? And then finally, long-term memory, right? You're depending on their long-term memory. You're saying you are hoping that they have these memories that they can bring out and retrieve for you during that interview. So if you just blindly jump into doing something like this, you're really losing out on, kind of learning the process behind it, right? So here's my next question to you. Ready? Which one of this is a penny? It's a
B.
B. All right, Zara, you're going with a B. All right. Okay, raise your hands if you think it's D. Let's start with from the back. Okay, what about C? I have one for D. Okay. C? Okay, one D, one C, one B. A? Okay. All right, I'm seeing a lot more A's. All right. Why is it? So explain to me, why is it that all of us, high schoolers and all, y'all don't know what is a penny? Why? Why is there so much confusion here?
I think that even though we've seen these symbols, this penny like so many times, we never took the time to look at it, see, okay, the liberty's over here, the date's over here, the face is facing that way. We never look at the little details. We just think the general picture. So that's why we can't tell which one it exactly is. We just don't know the order of where everything is on the penny.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So is that does that mean that our brains are there's something wrong with our thinking and our memories and our brains, or is that a good thing? Right. Most adults can't do this very well either, right? So it's not just us. It's just that your brains become really efficient, isn't it? Because it's always taking in so much information all the time. So you can't, it's kind of visually seeing things, it's feeling things, it's smelling things, it's all your senses are overloaded all the time. And so your brain really has to decide what to keep and what to release. Right. And so it really becomes very efficient in keeping only that information that's important. And so when you look at a penny, if I gave this to you in comparison to a dime or a nickel or, other coins, this would not be a problem at all. Right. Because all I need to know that this is a penny is the color and the shape. And then I'm good. I don't need to know which side Lincoln is facing or which side the year comes. That's a good thing. Right. So while it makes us very efficient, now think about your interview, right? What are those memories that your interviewee actually has and what is lost, right? And so when you think about it, again, if you don't give them enough time to think about what are those memories that they want to talk about that are actually, they clearly remember, and what are those that they don't remember and they don't want to spend too much time on, you've got to give them time to process those things. Right. And this is one of the reasons why that's so important. Similarly, what's wrong with this picture?
There's something in his teeth.
There's something in his teeth. And isn't that weird that this is a Colgate ad, right? Anybody has any other thoughts?
The woman's hand has 6 fingers.
Right, exactly. Right. And that's again what we call inattentional blindness, right? I completely distracted you with putting a Colgate logo over here. So obviously the first thing you thought about was, let's look at the teeth. Oh yeah, of course. How weird is that? Right? He's got something in his teeth and this is a Colgate ad. But really what I was trying to do is distract you from looking at this thing right here, where she's got 6 different fingers, right? We talk about minimizing distractions. It seems such an obvious thing. You've got to minimize distractions when you're studying, when you're working, when you're doing the interview. But I can't tell you how important that is, because even the slightest distraction, even the slightest kind of, something that's distracting you can create a distortion in your memory. And it can make you focus on things that are irrelevant rather than focusing on things that are relevant, right? And I can keep going on and on. Want to try this? What are you thinking? Anything missing?
The person's arm is
Yeah,
the
it's kind of weird. Exactly. And then this one, last one.
The guy's ear is missing.
The ear's missing, exactly. And if you still couldn't catch any of that, oh my gosh, you better make sure you're studying with absolutely no distractions, but because it looks like it's difficult to do that, right? So we'll end by thinking, so what? So these are some problems that you might experience, right, when you're doing this kind of an oral history project. So what can you do to help your interviewee really focus on the important details to bring out those parts of their memory that are important? You can do things to help them, all right? So this is where your pen and pencil is going to come into play. So be ready. I am going to show you on the next slide, I'm going to show you certain letters, right? It's just going to be a string of letters. You're going to memorize it. I'm going to give you about 12 seconds to memorize them, because that's how much time your working memory, right? The part of your memory that's doing the work right now, that's about how much time it's going to take to focus on the information. So you're going to memorize those letters from left to right, okay? Left to right. And then I'm going to shut the screen. And you're going to write down how many letters you remember, right? And we'll see who has the kind of strongest memory over here. But let's take a look at it and see. So ready? Everybody should be focusing on the screen. And I'm going to change the screen and give you about 12 seconds. Go ahead and memorize these letters. Okay, write down how many you remember. Okay, how many of you remember more than 5? Raise your hand. Not bad, very good. More than 6, 6 or more? 7. Okay, 8. Nice, all right, 9. All right, Nevi, you got it. All right, Nevi, how many did you get?
10.
10, all right. So here's the thing, doesn't surprise me. Why? Because working memory, the part of your brain that's doing the work, typically works with about 7 bits of information, plus or minus 2. So I've done this for over 10 years with every single class that I've ever taught. And almost nobody ever goes above 9 or 10, right? That's why our phone numbers are always like about 7 to 10 digits long internationally, right? However, now here's the deal. What if I gave you the same letters, but I placed them like this? Wouldn't that automatically make you remember more, right? This is what we call chunking. This is a process that teachers use all the time. We take large amounts of information and we organize it into chunks. And when we organize it into chunks, it helps us strengthen our memory systems, right? So the same letters, I can now organize them as KGB, FBI, BBC, DNA, and it automatically expands your ability to remember and process more information. Why am I talking to you about this? Because this is where your interview questions come into play, right? I showed you those questions that I laid out. Why did I organize them in the way that I organized them? It's not just because, it's easy to ask them in that way. It's because when you help your interviewees focus on chunks, right? Let's talk about your childhood first. It's gonna then let's talk about the journey. Then let's talk about what happened after you came. When you help them focus on chunks like that, you're helping them process that information more deeply, right? And so by making sure that your interview has questions that are organized in that way, it can be very helpful to your interviewee rather than asking them one question about their childhood and then jumping to a question about their family right now and then jumping to a question, back there. Make sure that you're organizing your questions in a way that it's helpful to them, right? And you can see, hopefully, that it works. Okay, one more. This is fine. Let's do this one. Okay. You're going to have to indulge me here, okay? Humor me, people. I know it's early in the morning, but humor me. I'm going to read this paragraph. You're going to fill in the blanks for me, right? So every time I stop at the word where you see a blank, you're going to shout out, and you can all unmute yourself now, and you're all going to shout out together what word you think should fit in there. Yeah? Do this. Trust me. Just humor me. Okay. So go ahead, unmute yourselves, and let's get started. The problems that confront
Parents.
in raising
Children.
from
Infant.
infants to adult life are not easy to
Do.
sure. Both
Family.
family and let's go with father and
Mother.
there you go, right? Meet with many
Dilemmas.
dilemmas, lovely, in their concern for the progress from the
early
stage to later life. It is important that young
Children.
should have plenty of
Sunlight.
and good
Food.
for healthy growth.
But
Okay, and well, but won't work, but boys and
Girls.
should not occupy the same
bad
or sleep in the same.
room.
They're often afraid of the
dark
Dark.
okay, isn't that cool? Like how we all came up with the exact same words, right? But here's what I was thinking, right? Exactly. So here's my question. How do I make sure that my interviewee is focusing on this, because this is what we want to focus on, and not this, right? And this is where it is so important that you share your questions with your interviewee, at least some of them, like a sample, right? Let them know from the beginning, here are the things we're going to talk about. Here are the things that I would like to know. This is why I'm doing it, right? Because what this does is it helps them remove all those distractions that might be there and really focus on what is the information that they really want to share with you, right? And that's why I gave you so much time up until now to really talk to them before and to help them really focus on things that are important, right? And so that's where I'll tell you, share your interviews with them. It's a very helpful step for many of them. And then the last thing that's a good practice to do when you're doing an oral history, I keep telling you, right? Probe. Ask the how, why, when, what questions. This is why we do it. Cognitive scientists have studied how people learn best, right? And this is a very common experiment we do with a lot of our students. So I'll kind of lay it out to you. We give people a group of words to memorize, right? And then, of course, we test them on it. But we break people up into groups. One group is told, oh, you're going to have a quiz on it. There's going to be a grade. It's going to affect your ultimate grade in the class, all of that. And then the other group is told, don't worry about it. It's just a fun activity. No big deal, right? Then each of those groups are further divided into one group is told, okay, take a word, repeat it 3 times, and that's how you're going to memorize it. The other group is told, no, take a word, add meaning to it, put it in a sentence, and then memorize it that way, right? Which of these 4 groups do you think is going to do best on the test ultimately, always gets the highest score? The one that's warned about the quiz, but then does, just repeats and memorizes, or adds emotions and adds, depth to their thinking, or the one that's not warned about the quiz and then same through strategies. Any thoughts? And this is usually done with freshmen in college, at the undergraduate level, in STEM especially. Any thoughts on which group always scores the highest? Group 2? All right, Kasra, you're going with 2. Seems like the most logical one, right? This is what we generally see. There's really no difference in whether you tell them it is a quiz or not. It just all depends on how well and how deeply they're thinking about it, right? Which is where those probing questions come into play, which is why I'm always talking to you about, all right, let's make sure that you don't just kind of let things go halfway in the middle. Ask them the how, when, why question, right? So thank you for doing this with me. I apologize if this became a little bit of a lesson, but I think it's important for you to understand how important it is to be prepared before you sit down to do the interview. Yeah. What are some thoughts coming into your head? Do you have any questions right now? Everything seems good. Okay, so with that, I'm going to do one last thing with you so that you all can, you're all ready to do the interview now. I think you're all absolutely fantastically, connected with this project and you know what you're doing. Here are 2 things I'm going to point out to you. This is very important, people. Okay, now we're just getting into the steps of doing the interview, right? So this is critical. This is your informed consent form. Your informed consent form is something that you have to use to get your interviewee to sign this form before you do during the interview, right? Now, it is highly recommended that when you talk to your interviewee and you say, hey, I'm going to interview you, and you're setting that time with them and saying where you're going to do the interview, when you're going to do the interview, I highly recommend that you share the questions that you want to ask them in general, if not all the questions, then at least a sample of questions with them. And along with that, share this document with them. When you click here, it will take you to a PDF, which you can just print out, right? But it's important for them to know that a few things. And when you read this informed consent form, notice what we're talking about. We're saying that this is a project that you're working on with Fazana, right? It's affiliated with Fazana. We are making very clear and telling them that we are going to either audio tape you or videotape you. So, they have to give you permission to do that. But it's also important for them to know that they can withdraw their consent at any time, right? Sometimes certain individuals are going to talk to you about some very sensitive topics, right? And while initially they might feel, yeah, sure, no problem. Later on, they might realize, I don't want to share this with the public. I don't want to, everybody to know this particular thing. That's okay. We can edit that out. If they say after the interview, they say, no, I don't want to, I don't think I want to make this public. That's perfectly fine as well. But we have to always give our participants the ability to withdraw consent at any time, right? And it's important for them to know that. It's also important for them to know that once you are done interviewing them, their interview will be it will be publicly available. So we will publish it on the Fazana website. It might be on Fires. We might decide to create a podcast series out of it. We might publish things from it in certain articles. So they should be clear and they should know that their interviews will be accessible to the public, right? It's very clear that they know that. And So they should also, of course, know that we will always, they have the right to this recording, so they can use it in any way that they want as well. These are all professional development steps, right, that are very important when you're doing a project like this. But it's important for you to get them to read this and to sign this. And then once they've signed it, keep it with you, and then I'll let you know where you can upload it so that we can keep it on our file. Does that make sense? Questions about the informed consent process? Okay. So this is, many of you are going to be working with family members, so it might feel like, oh, but this is my mom. Of course she doesn't mind, but it is still incredibly important. Again, like I said, it's a professional development step, and it's really important that you make sure that you're kind of doing this. Neville, yes.
If we're doing like a Zoom interview, how would you want us to get their consent?
You'll have to email it to them in the beginning before the interview,
Okay.
right? And then they'll have to put their sign on it and then send it back to you.
All right.
Yeah. And it's a good question, because that's where it's going to take us to this final thing that I want to share with you, which is a step-by-step guide on actually conducting the interview, right? So please read this very carefully. Read this, pay attention to the things that we're talking about. You've already done step 1 and step 2. This is pretty much done for all of you. We've talked a lot about what is the purpose of doing what you are doing. We've talked about the pre-interviews, right? You've met with, hopefully, some of you, most of you actually have met with the people who you are going to be interviewing. And you've had a conversation with them about, this is what we're going to talk about, get to know them a little. What are some important things that you should be talking about in your interview? Hopefully you've had that discussion with them. Make sure that you're very clear about where you're going to do the interview, what technology you're going to use, and then finally, what are the challenges that are going to be. We've talked about all of this, so you should be good with this. When it comes to technology, I say keep it simple, right? So Zoom is great, of course, if it's somebody who you can't meet in person anyway. Zoom is great. Number 2, use your phone. It's perfect, right? Phones today are fantastic. If you have an audio recording or a video recording app on your phone, go for it. Ask them what they're comfortable doing. You can do just an audio recording if that's what they want to do. You can do a video recording, right? It's always nice to see them talk. It's always fun to see people's expressions and things like that. And especially if they're going to show you some artifacts, like, hey, here are some pictures, or here are some, documents, things like that. You might want to do a video interview, but talk to them first and ask them before you sit down, what are they comfortable doing, right? From our perspective, it doesn't matter how you do it, as long as we have a recording. Yeah. And then this is where, and then finally your interview questions. We've already talked about that. You have a whole list in front of you. So all this is taken care of. This is what you're going to do now, right? The actual day of the interview. Make sure that your setting is, you've kind of set everything up so that there are no glitches in the middle. Remember that your interview is going to be viewed by a lot of people all across the globe, right? People are excited about this. They want to see, young individuals taking the initiative to do things like this. And so you're going to get a lot of visibility because people are going to want to watch your projects. And so we don't want it to be as seamless, as possible. So, make sure that you're taking care of all of these things before sitting down with the person. When you're conducting the interview, few steps to keep in mind. Number 1, you're always going to begin by introducing yourself, obviously, and a little bit, just a little, like, thank you for doing this, and your purpose for doing this. You're not beginning your recording yet, right? So hold on. You then have to ask permission for them to allow you to record them, right? And you want to make sure that they have seen and read the consent form that you shared with them. If, Navi, like you were saying, if it's a Zoom interview, you should have shared that form with them before so that they can take a look at it. So ask them if they've seen it and they're good with everything. If if they're in person with you, that form should be right there so that you can, make sure that they've read it, right? Once they say, yep, we've read it, we're good, then you start recording, right? When you start recording, then, you kind of do your interview, you remember all the rules of, doing an interview, you probe, you do all of these things, you listen more, you talk less, everything that we've talked about. And then once you are done recording, and once the interview is finished, you've got to debrief your participant, which means that you have to tell them, thank you, this is going to be a huge contribution, great value to our community, and very important, ask them to sign the form, right? Can any of you all tell me why we get them to sign the form after doing the interview rather than before? Any thoughts? Why not just get them to sign it before? Zarina, go for it.
To make sure they consent to everything they talked about in the interview, like if they didn't know they were going to talk about something.
Exactly, right? I mean, think about it. What if somebody asks you to consent to an interview, and then they ask you, you say yes and you sign, and then they ask you questions that makes you feel uncomfortable, and at that point you're saying, no, I don't want this. That's just not right? So that's why this is the process that all professionals follow when they're doing any kind of interview that's going to be archived. You let them know that they're going to be giving you consent, right? At the end, they're going to sign this document, but you wait till they've done the interview so that you give them time to think about, am I sure, am I comfortable with sharing this information with the world? Okay, so just keep that step in mind. And then finally, after you're done with the interview, just make sure that you have a good clear copy of the interview with you, and then email me and I'll tell you what to do with your recording. I don't want to kind of make it more complicated. So let me know that you're ready, you have the recording, you're ready to go, and I will tell you what to do with it. Post-processing, we'll talk individually at that point about how do you want your interview to be published, right? Do you want it to just be an audio file? If it's an audio file, do you want to add some graphics to it? We can work on that together. If it's a video file, do you want to kind of talk about having those documents so that we can kind of focus in on the documents, and we can work individually with your projects to make sure that it is in a form that you want it to be. Again, you can be creative here. We will need a transcript, but getting a transcript is really easy. Those of you who are doing Zoom recordings, you can ask Zoom to give you a transcript automatically, right? If you don't know how to do that, let me know. But you can basically just go into your settings and just tell Zoom that you're going to want an automatic transcript, and Zoom will give it to you. If you're not doing Zoom, it doesn't matter. Use a video app, use your camera, whatever it is to record your interview, and then we will upload it to Microsoft Word, and Microsoft Word will give us a transcript of your recording. So don't worry about transcribing, that's easily doable in today's day and age, but we will need a transcript as well. Do you all have any questions? All good? Feeling good about this project?
Versus, I have a question.
Yes.
Can you remind everybody again regarding the flexibility of the language that the interviewee could use?
Absolutely. Yes. So when you're talking with the interviewee, obviously you do want to, make sure that they can first understand your questions. So if they are comfortable talking in a different language and you're comfortable communicating in a different language, or even if you need a translator to do that, totally fine. Do the interview in the language that the interviewee is comfortable doing it in. And they might code switch, which is even more beautiful, right? Code switching is when I use English sometimes, and then I suddenly move into using Gujarati or Farsi, and then I move back into using English, right? It's like Spanglish, right? And so code switching is very common for many of us, and that's perfectly great. Don't worry about it. We will make sure to translate whatever they're saying into English when we publish it, and we will have those captions in English so that people who want to understand but don't know the language will understand it. So yes, make sure that your interviewee is as comfortable as possible.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. That was a great question. Any other questions? Anything that's confusing, anything that you'd like to share? All right, so here's what I'm going to ask you to do very quickly before leaving. In the chat box, I'm putting a link. This is a link to the document that I am now using to make sure that I know who you're interviewing, right? And a few details about your interview before you jump in. Go ahead, if you know who you're interviewing, go ahead and just for now, just put in the name of the person who you're interviewing in the column which says interviewee name. And so just right here, right? Go ahead and put in their names. If you don't know that yet, don't worry about it. And if you need help finding somebody, put that in here. Need help finding somebody, right? And I'll help you find somebody to interview. But I want to know where every person is at, and then all the other spaces as well. If you all could take a few minutes to just briefly, I don't want a big write-up, just briefly give me a couple of points in each of those columns. I'll get a good sense of who's interviewing who. The reason I'm doing this is because I'm starting to think about how we're going to publish these. Like, I know that several of you are actually interviewing priests, which is fantastic, which is lovely. But that means that we could literally publish those together. So go ahead and just fill out these sections for me. And if there are, like I said, if you need help, put that in this document as well.
Wait, where do we find this document?
I just put the link in the chat box.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So just click on that and you should be able to type right into it. Oh, wait, hold on. For some reason, I put the link only to Arvind. Hold on. I got to send it to everybody. There we go. All right. Now you should have it. Sorry about that. But go ahead and, just fill it in, fill as much as you can, and then you're done for today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.
And I'm always available. So if you need any more, you need to talk anymore, you need to kind of feel some ideas by me before you do this, please feel free to do that. But otherwise, you are ready. Like, go do your interview.
Okay, thank you.
See you, Gasra.
Bye.